When discussing storytelling, particularly in the medium of animation, I don't think we as an audience bring enough attention to the importance of visual presentation and how that plays a crucial factor in elevating the material it's working with. There is one exception to this generally. In a post-Kimetsu no Yaiba and Jujutsu Kaisen world, the quality and quantity of sakuga brings much attention and discussion. So much so, its absence from certain projects brings similar attention and discussion, usually for much more negative reasons. To many, it's the go-to way to make moments feel impactful, to feel lasting. But it's not the only, dare I say, best way to make these moments more impactful either. Visual storytelling, after all, is a bit more than just the way art moves. It's also the way it looks and represents the story it exists to visualize. And while there are plenty of brilliant examples of how anime production teams have utilized their medium to their advantage to transform words on pages into spectacles of anime beauty, I feel the example that has left the most massive impression on me was the anime adaptation of the light novel series, Monogatari. To be exact, the adaptations of its first four novels, what became 2009's Bakemonogatari, and the 2016 and 17 trilogy of films known as Kizumonogatari. I never actually continued Monogatari past these earlier materials, a result of lost interest in the franchise as I moved on to other stories to engage with long ago. Monogatari's story is good, but it never really stuck with me. Instead, the way it presented that story, that's what stuck with me at the time and in the years since. After all, Monogatari looks and feels unlike anything else the medium of anime has ever delivered, and if I'm not mistaken, this is most certainly the result of its background as a light novel adaptation. If you have a book, go ahead and open it up. Tell me what you find inside. Words. Tons of words. Pages upon pages of words. Like, yeah, fork found in kitchen. Your average Monogatari novel is no different in that regard. Words and tons of them. Where I think they take this to an absurd level, however, is in its dialogue, and the way the characters bounce off of each other. I've always felt Monogatari's story is told as vignettes. An issue comes up, and a massive part of the story detailing it are just the characters engaging in discussion spurred on by that issue. The very first scene in Kizumonogatari is protagonist Araragi walking home solemnly before getting a glimpse at a girl's panties. Said girl, as we later find out, is named Hanekawa Tsubasa, and she quickly strikes up a conversation with the boy, a conversation over tons of things. Tons of things that end up giving us a good idea of both of these characters, but a conversation that lasts for 20 pages. 20 pages where the plot isn't really pushed forward because what matters here are the characters and their dynamics. And to me, this style of writing is at the core of Monogatari's story. Araragi needs fellow lesbian Suguru Kanbaru's help? That's cool, but first she needs to get naked and with absolute boisterous bravado explain exactly why she thinks she should and will continue to be naked even if Araragi thinks that doesn't make any sense. Araragi and Senjugahara need to help a lost little girl? Sure, but they'll take a moment to explain to the audience what the Parent-Teacher Association is, and maybe point out how the initials make it seem like they're talking about percutaneous transluminal angioplasty. Araragi is about to fight a 400-year-old vampire? Sounds fun, but first he needs to spend 6 minutes, consensually, I might add, touching Hanekawa's breasts. Dialogue and the interactions between characters is the main focus of Monogatari, or it's always seemed that way to me. Even the dialogue itself is filled with interesting wordplay that sadly struggles to make any sense when translated outside of its original language. I mean, just look at the name of the show. The first three novels are collectively known as Bakemonogatari, which is often translated simply as monster story. While technically accurate, that translation loses a bit of the linguistic playfulness present in the original Japanese title. Bakemonogatari is itself a portmanteau combining bakemono, meaning monster or apparition, with monogatari, meaning story. It's a small example, but one that illustrates just how deeply Monogatari's identity is intertwined with language itself. But getting back on track, let me go back to my comment about that post-panty scene taking 20 pages, because I think it perfectly demonstrates why Monogatari goes in the visual direction it does. Those 20 pages of dialogue from the novel become nearly 10 minutes in the film adaptation. 10 minutes of pure, raw dialogue, of two characters interacting. And while this is very important for setting up the dynamics of the characters in the story, on paper a scene like this runs the risk of running very thin. And unfortunately, this is a concern that, as a result of how these novels are written, every single storyline, almost every single scene, has to contend with. How do you make lengthy conversations that go on for pages and pages at a time engaging when adapting them into a visual medium? The answer is by making sure every single frame feels dynamic, feels as unusual as the discussions held between the characters, conveys the ideas of each piece of dialogue without having to overly explain the characters' thought processes. Take, for example, the various backgrounds of Bakemonogatari. They lean onto the side of minimalism, often being very straightforward shapes, uniform patterns, and flat basic colors. There is a sense of liminality to these spaces, not only because I can't remember anyone that wasn't the main characters occupying these spaces, but also because there is a dreamlike quality to the way they are not only framed but constructed. The architecture at times flat out doesn't make any sense. One second Hanekawa is walking past the school building, the next an industrial park. Or at one point, Araragi is standing in the parking lot of his school, but it seems to be just an endless row of bicycles. I don't think this many students bring this many bicycles to school. At a certain point, these environments stop feeling like real places altogether, instead acting as conduits for the emotions of the characters that exist within these locations, as extensions of the vibes the story wants us to feel. Take, for example, Suguru Kanbaru's bedroom. In the novels, it's described as exactly what you'd expect from a teenager's room, a complete mess filled with books, cardboard boxes, and discarded underwear. The anime, however, distills that clutter into the image of a room that's messy because it's filled with nothing but identical red 3D books. Similarly, Araragi describes Kanbaru's home as traditionally Japanese, drawing particular attention to its old-fashioned sliding doors. Rather than simply presenting this information through dialogue, the anime emphasizes it visually through a series of quick cuts as Kanbaru moves through multiple sets of them before finally entering her room. Even if from an architecture perspective the way it's all constructed doesn't really make much sense. That being said, even when Monogatari adopts more grounded environments, the anime avoids framing them in normal, traditional ways, making them feel far more stylized and unique, and the placement of the characters in them all the more interesting. I'd also say framing of the story plays an important role in giving Monogatari its distinct identity and aesthetic. Kanbaru's room isn't the only way the anime reinterprets the novel's events and reframes them visually to further get across the vibes of certain scenes. Take, for example, Senju Gohara's introduction in both the novel and the anime. In the original text, Araragi is rushing up the stairs on his way to class when Senju Gohara suddenly trips and falls into his arms. It's a relatively straightforward event. However, Araragi offhandedly comments that it was as if she had fallen from the heavens. The anime takes this brief piece of narration and runs with it. The school staircase stretches impossibly high into the sky, ascending towards what appears to be the heavens themselves. Senju Gohara plummets from above at blistering speeds, only to land gently within Araragi's embrace. Or the Kizumonogatari film, which starts with a cold open, adapting the scene where Araragi tries to go outside after becoming a vampire. In the novel, this scene takes place within an abandoned cram school. Araragi simply walks down a set of stairs, stepping over discarded trash before discovering the consequences of his new condition. In the film, however, the abandoned cram school is replaced with a sleek, modern building that I don't believe is meant to reflect a school of any kind, being more mall-like in its structure and architecture. However, once the story returns to the setting proper later in the film, it depicts the cram school more traditionally and grounded, like an actual dilapidated school building. It appears to me this change is less about altering the scene and more about conveying the emotional vibe of this introduction sequence. The breathtaking yet vast empty hallways and seemingly endless spiral staircases create an atmosphere that feels deeply unnerving. At this point of the story, we aren't yet aware that Araragi has become a vampire, but it's immediately apparent that something is wrong. The environment itself communicates his unease, and it goes a long way in setting the tone of that film. Just in general, the direction of the Monogatari series is very good at setting a good tone for every single scene, color choices, visual framing, and unconventional visual choices that you don't really see in other anime. Believe me, there are tons of anime with incredible visual identities and shot compositions, but nothing as out there and unique as Monogatari. Based on my research, part of this is the result of the influence of French New Wave films on the director of Bake and Kizu, Tatsuya Oishi. I'm not very versed in what specific influences this had on the production and what specific visual styles he took from it. Regardless of specific influences, the results is obvious on screen. The usage of real-life footage or imagery, conversations framed from unique perspectives, the sometimes rapid-fire cuts, deliberate continuity discrepancies between said cuts, and perhaps my favorite, the screen cards that often punctuate dialogue with flashes of text, emphasizing an important word or, interestingly enough, inserting dialogue lifted directly from the novels. That all aside, what I find especially interesting about Monogatari is that there isn't just one Monogatari style. Bake and Kizumonogatari, as I mentioned a moment ago, were both directed by Tatsuya Oishi, but his approaches to the anime stylistically are so different between these two, it's almost like watching two entirely separate series. Bakemonogatari's animation is much more constrained, focusing on strong art and posing while letting the visual flair and enigmatic stylization do all the talking. Backgrounds are often surreal and minimalistic, and the characters are incredibly colorful and saturated. By comparison, Kizumonogatari is incredibly animated, utilizing strong character animation to relay the emotions of each scene, foregoing Araragi's inner monologues typical of the other adaptations to give it a more cinematic vibe. It also blends 2D art with photorealistic 3D backgrounds. And this also goes for the other anime in the Monogatari series. While I still haven't gotten around to the likes of Nisei Monogatari and the other anime adaptations as well as novels, I am aware as a result of Kizumonogatari's production cycle, these other anime feature a different director, and as such feature their own approach to the Monogatari style. But given the precedent set by Bakemonogatari and Kizumonogatari, I'm willing to go on a limb and assume it's going to be nothing short of exceptional visually. If nothing else, these adaptations reminded me just how creative anime can be when it fully embraces the strengths of its medium. In spite of the fact that I never even got that far into the franchise and didn't even think twice about the story it was telling me, it's never left my mind. I think the fact that Monogatari has stayed with me for all these years speaks volumes about what it was able to accomplish through its creativity and presentation alone. Even if the Monogatari franchise is now well over 20 years old, I hope creators continue taking inspiration from its willingness to experiment, and I hope audience continue seeking out the stories willing to do the same.